Chapter 2 The Tower. Arch Mother of Mothers, draw a circle. Female of females, open your house. Crush our souls, eat our hearts. Unity is sweet, unity is great. Entwine our thoughts, trample our will. You are the light, you are the womb. Consume us, consume time. Let the days burn, let the dreams fade. Darkness, moisture, unity. A mitraji chant of offering. The town was not large, the size of a settlement. No longer a kishlak, but not yet a city. The first one I'd seen since that terrible stormy night, when the rebellion broke out, and I watched as my palace, the village of clouds, die amidst roaring flames. I also saw Maranhar perish under the blows of the sickles of the cavalry and the short swords of the soldiers from the stone timon. After that, there were only wastelands, forests, and trails. Now, for the first time, we had to pass through a town. It would have been best to avoid it, but the Figis River, flowing down from the mountains nearby, proved too fast and dangerous, even after such a long draft. But the draft now was over, and with the victory of the underground mother, the rains had returned, washing down the mountains and fields, filling the rivers once more. So, we had to cross the bridge, and the only bridge in the area spanned the banks here, in the settlement of Ashirdim. That's why I was watching approaching buildings. I, the Lord of the Tiger Throne, the Fiery Banner, the Master of the World and the First Rider, was observing the world, walking beside a two-wheeled cart, on which my defender and guide, the last subject I had left, sprawled under an umbrella. I wore baggy pants and the red tunic of an underground mother adept slung over one shoulder, and the freshly shaved skin on my head stunk painfully. We had shaved in a hurry, hidden among twisted trees far from the road, helping each other. Hone, without the slightest grimace, had cut off his veteran braid, only murmuring that he should have done it a long time ago. We buried our hair in the sand, mine and Hone's mixed together. We dragged the corpses of the priest and the adept far away from the road, and pushed them into a sandy ravine, covering them with sand. It all happened quietly and suddenly. The priest had called us over authoritatively and ordered us to help his adept, who was struggling with a crooked wheel. We helped him, and I didn't expect what would happen next. Hone turned suddenly and grabbed the priest by the head, one hand at the nape of the neck, the other pushing his chin to the side. He did it so swiftly, as if he were catching a thrown fruit. The crack of vertebrae echoed, and the masked man collapsed from the seat of the cart, convulsing grotesquely. For a moment, both the adept and I stared in shock until I realized it was my turn. I raised the spy stick to reveal the hidden blade. "No! No blood!" Hone shouted. He leaped from the cart, bounced off a donkey's back with one foot, and landed on the fleeing adept's back. They tumbled to the ground, writhing like fighting snakes. Eventually, they went still, with a young adept kicking more violently in all directions, raising clouds of dust with the soles of his sandals, his head trapped between Hone's intertwined arms. It lasted forever. I didn't know what to do, so I watched, counting the frantic beats of my heart. Finally, the desperate kicking stopped, and only one of the adept's legs twitched, drumming his heel in the sand. And even then that movement ceased. Hone gave the boy one last jerk, like a leopard with a hunted rabbit, untangled his arm, and pushed the lifeless body off of him. "Help me load them onto the cart," he hissed. "Quickly! Someone will come soon. It's always like that. When you need someone, it's as if they are long dead. But when you don't, people show up like there's a wedding around." The priest was terribly heavy, and the adept looked horrifying. His eyes bulged as if something had pushed them out from within, completely bloodshot, and his mouth has swollen, his tongue sticking out like a strange purple fruit. We drove off the road, the cart rolling and swaying between the trees, my stomach in knots. "Not now, not now," Hone greeted. "You can let it out soon." Once we found a relatively safe spot, he tossed me a lava flask filled with water mixed with vinegar. I drank, then violently vomited onto the ground, choking on painful spasms that brought tears streaming down my face. When it was over, I was so weak I had to sit down. "It's normal," my companion said soothingly. "You'll get used to blood and death, but it takes time. One day you'll stop getting sick, but when that happens, part of you dies. A piece of your heart turns to stone." After we disposed of the bodies, we searched the content of the cart. We found a small bundle with the adept's belonging, a basket of food, mainly flatbreads made of durra and onions, dried honey plums, water, and a chest with the priest's robes. No meat, no spiced beer, and no palm wine. Not even a piece of cheese. "I don't like this," I suddenly declared. "Maybe some time has passed since the rebellion broke out, but it's still not safe. We ourselves ran into marauders not far from here. Why was this priest traveling alone, like he's on a stroll? Don't they usually travel with an escort? If they didn't give him soldiers, why weren't there at least 8 adepts with hefty clubs?" Hone was kneeling on the ground, examining the priest's robes, but he froze and looked up at me, surprised. "Let's check the cart thoroughly," he said. "I have no idea why this happened. Maybe he was from the local tower here, in Ashurdam. He might not have traveled far." "Then why did he have provision for water and food?" I pressed. I wasn't sure if it was instinct, suspicion, or simply because I didn't want to wear the clothes of a boy we had just killed. Nor did I want to pose as a priest. "His robes are too fine. I know the priests generally live decently, but even the emperor's official from backwaters like Ashurdam couldn't afford to dress in silk. Look at his carved tortoise shelf spoon, bowl, or the writing set. These items wouldn't shame the house of Cinnabar. Mine own were far more modest. This isn't an ordinary priest. I don't understand why he was traveling alone." "We don't have a choice," Hone stated. "We have to get across the bridge. Once we're far enough, we'll hide the cart and their things. Just get across the bridge quickly. We just need a fable." "What fable, Sitar Tenzin?" "A clever lie. A story you tell instead of a truth if someone stops us. You always need to prepare your fable in advance and memorize it. You need to know who you are, what are you doing and why. Always, at all times. Even if you think no one will ask, you must have a fable." We searched the bundles and chests in the cart again. Hone inspected it from a few paces away, checked under the wheels and felt around the harness. He tugged at the fittings. Nothing. We even tapped the sides of the cart. I went through the pile of belongings of both travelers again, looking for any documents. They were small wooden plaques with the name and surname of a person burned into the wood, along with a seal of an imperial official. During my father's reign, those were only useful where proving your identity, typically in an office or court. But earlier, and according to the Code of Earth, everyone had to carry such a plaque at all times, attached to their wrist with a strap or hang around the neck. Traveling without permission was also forbidden. Each journey required special authorization. I didn't know if this was still the case. Had Ifrisia reinstated all the old customs? And had she already implemented them? I had no idea if this applied to her priests either. That's why I didn't like that we had to impersonate them. We knew too little about it. "It's not like we are going to perform a ritual or so," Hone said. "It's just about the damned bridge." You are the one who said we need a fable, I countered. How do you want to make one up if we don't even know their names? They have Mitraji names. Under the code, their lower castes were not allowed to have surnames, only first names. But the priests are outside the castes. As the enlightened, they are above everything. We'll use traditional Amitraji surnames, like Chugai Tekadei and Harsh Lakerdin. I knew such people once, so I'm sure they are dead. Why do they ban surnames? Doesn't that just create more confusion? Because surnames tie people to their ancestors and families, and there are not supposed to be families anymore. Families are evil, and so are the surnames. It all only strengthens human selfishness. When you have a family, you care more for them than for the others, but it's the mother, through the mouths of the priests, who decides who is more important and who is to be sacrificed. All children belong to all women and to the underground mother, and an individual has no significance at all. Groups matter, houses, settlements, and so on. A person would get a nickname that died with them. Everything is supposed to become one, remember that. People too. Besides, they don't need to control them, only supervise. People are supposed to work and fight for the underground mother and pay her tribute. If you have a herd of Kashib, you don't give them names. You watch over the whole herd. It's enough to count them. A name is needed for a steed, for a dog or for a leopard. And there are none here. Only Kashib. Don't think too much, Arjuk. Thinking about too many things is good when you are in a safe place, sitting by the fire with a cup of tea. Now it will only make you scared. I don't know why the priest was traveling alone. Maybe it's safer here than what we think. Maybe he had a mission and wanted to slip by unnoticed to avoid drawing attention. Maybe he was a fool. Our goal is to get across the bridge, nothing more, nothing less. The rest is just details. We'll hide our belongings. Once we are far enough on the trail, the priest and his adept will disappear, and 2 Sindars returning to Karmisar will be on their way again. And the fable? We'll come up with one shortly, he muttered, climbing onto the cart and feeling around the seat. He pulled something, and suddenly there was a quiet click. I knew it, he called triumphantly. What is it? I asked. A hidden compartment, but it wouldn't open from the top, the bottom, or the front, just a regular seat. But it opened from the back. And what's inside, Sita Tenzin? Better see for yourself, Arjuk. Inside the wooden seat was a red-hooded cloak and a sleeping mat. I didn't understand what Home wanted to show me until I discovered something heavy and bulky hidden inside the rolled-up cloak. We took out the bundle and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small iron strongbox. On the convex lid, red painted symbol of a strange shape had been riveted. A band, with semicircular hooks at each end, was crossed in the middle by 3 short lines. The box was additionally wrapped neatly with thick red silk cord, and all the intricate knots were sealed with wax, bearing a similar mark. Do we open it? I asked. Absolutely not, Home declared firmly. We have our fable now. It's a delivery, and an urgent one at that. I bet, Arjuk, that half a day ahead of us on this very road, a large, ironclad travelled cart, a real house on 6 wheels, passed by, pulled by 8 big onagers, accompanied by a listhon of mounted archers with the banners of the underground mother's temple on their backs and 20 adepts. And what was inside? A few priests, maybe some adepts or adepts in training for company, baskets of food, perfumes, fans, and muslins, and a similar box filled with sand. The real delivery is here. I snorted in irritation. You were supposed to come up a fable for the bridge guards, not for me. Maybe this box contains a stash of priest's forbidden palm wine. He shook his head. I know that when you need to send something during dangerous time, sometimes it's done this way. Even very important people are sent this way. An armed entourage attracts attention, and meanwhile, the princess travels dressed as a peasant. I have no idea if that's what happened this time, but I do know it could have, and will act as if that's exactly what happened. This symbol might mean something. What does it remind you of? I shrugged. Nothing. Maybe a thorny branch, some odd blacksmithing tool, a strange comb? And what if it could move and wreathe? I looked again. A venomous scorpentine! Exactly. I see it too. And the scorpentine means danger, something poisonous or threatening. It evokes fear. It's on the seals, on the box, and on that priest's chest. Usually, you see this. He showed me one of the gold amulets he had taken from the dead man's neck. A circle with a small triangle in the center, from which a thin golden rod extended slightly outward. I had seen these symbols many times recently. It was painted on the walls, carved into the chests of corpses found down on the streets. Hastily drawn in charcoal or scratched with a blade, it was just a circle and a line, but I recognized it all the same. The underground womb. I swallowed hard. The burning city flashed before my eyes again. Look at the desert. The fire is coming. But this one also had this, look here. The same as on the box. An iron scorpentine. Why is it on such a long chain? Watch this. He hung the amulet around his own neck and tucked it in under his tunic. This symbol isn't meant to be visible, unlike the others. It's not even gold, just iron. But when necessary, I can pull it out and show it to someone without leaving the guard. Like this. I think when I discreetly show the amulet to the commander of the unit at the bridge, will pass without even a single question. I wasn't convinced, but I had no other choice. I squatted among the belongings we had found with the two travelers, laid out on the clock. We knew so little. If anything went wrong, the whole charade would fall apart. All it would take was one stupid word. Hone was turning over the richly layered robes in his hands, trying to figure out how they were worn. What if we put something on the wrong backward or upside down? It's just a small settlement and one bridge, Hone reassured me, as if reading my mind. The odd, one-sleeve tunic of the adept, which left the left shoulder bare, had a deep pocket inside, where I found a bone spoon and a small plate tied with a leather cord. The adept's name was Agren Kesalden, I said. Strange. What kind of a name is Pimpled? And his surname is like a settlement. What kind of a person is named Salthatz? Because he was Kaship, Hone replied, pulling on his pants. You name animals based on whatever stands out immediately. It makes them easier to remember. One has a floppy ear, so you would call it Floppy. Another a spot on his back, so you call it Patchy. And this one was pockmarked. And Kisalden was probably the Kishlak he came from. If he had lived long enough to see his initiation, he would have received a different name as a priest. At least we know his name. The priest didn't have any documents. He had a personal seal, but it only bears a symbol, a water turtle. Do you speak the unity speech? I sighed. Only a little. I began hesitantly, but Hone shook his head. A little is not enough. You can't make mistakes. So, we'll pretend you to be the mute and the fool. I raised an eyebrow. Just smile mindlessly, nod your head and sometimes babble. I'll handle the rest. So here I was, the lord of a tiger throne, the fiery banner and the master of the world and the first rider, holding the reins, walking beside the cart, with a shaved, scarred head, the pimpled one from Kesaldem, an adept of the underground mother, a mentally impaired mute. Yes, that's me. And that's how I found myself on the road, swallowing dust, staring at the rear end of the donkeys and the approaching town. Holding the reins, I tried to calm my terrified breathing, while my stomach twisted painfully into knots. I didn't know if it was from the hunger, fear, or both at once. Before we got back on the road, Home told me to go into the bushes and empty my bowels. Always try to do that when you know a fight or something terrifying might be awaiting. It helps a bit, and, if nothing else, it'll save you some dignity. I've seen people who, even though they fought bravely, didn't even notice they soiled themselves at mere sight of the enemy. It happens often, though neither veterans nor commander ever talk about it. Walking along the road now, I was grateful for that advice. Normally, before a town, there would be a bustling bazaar. In every settlement along the roads there is trade. Traveling merchants need food, fodder, pens for animals, and lodging, but they also like to sell a few goods. Some drovers run their own side business, and sometimes that's their only payment for leading a convoy of carts and pack animals. This is how towns along the roads make a living. But not now. The bazaar was empty and deserted. The stalls, resembling small city houses, had the windows boarded up, and in front of the well there was a huge line of travelers holding various containers, yet no one was drawing water. 2 soldiers in drab tunics, with spears in hand, stood guard by the well. They wore hardened leather armor so dusty that I couldn't make out which Timon they belonged to. Yet, no one argued. No one asked why they couldn't draw or even buy water. The people waiting didn't even speak. They sat, squatted, or stood in the kaftans and trousers, all in the caste colors, mostly drab grey and brown. Hiruks, Karahims, and Udarai. Closer to the well, I could see a few yellow kaftans of Sindars, but even they weren't filling their containers. A dead silence hung over the square, with only the buzzing of flies. The people looked completely resigned, and as we passed, a boy collapsed to the ground, lying in the dust, and no one even bent down to help him. He just lay there, flies crawling over his bare feet. I noticed that only men stood in line for the well. The inns and guest houses along the road appeared closed, despite the growing number of silent travelers. We passed about a dozen Hiruks, their foreheads tied with identical scarves, led by an elder with a travel hat, who had a pole with a banner tied to his belt. The banner read, 18 villagers from Kahadem working in the name of a mother. Let all become one. The words were written one below the other, and as the banner fluttered, I stopped to read it. Home whipped me with a reed. I looked at him reflexively and saw only my own reflection in the priest's mirrored mask. In the eyeholes of a mask, there was an impenetrable darkness. I did not understand what I was seeing. Sometimes a ruler demands foolish things, but usually for a reason. This just seemed burdensome and absurd. After a while, I saw more of these banners on the backs of travelers and stopped wondering about anything. On the contrary, I expected to see someone soon with a banner reading. A blacksmith from Ashirdim going to relieve himself. Let all become one. The priest we killed didn't have a banner, which meant not everyone had to carry one. The slow-moving procession of travelers seemed to be the only movement in the settlement. I looked at the shuttered windows of the shops and inns, seeing traces where signs had been torn down. The dusty streets were eerily empty, with only trash blowing through them. But there were no signs of fighting. Nothing had been burned or destroyed, and the yellow clay walls weren't marked with blood. A city has to survive on something. There are no fields or herds in the cities. How do they plan to collect taxes where nothing is working? There wasn't a single sign, only bare, sun-scorched walls. Where can you eat? Where can you repair or buy shoes? Where can you find food? How do you find the healer's house? There were only windows, lifelessly shuttered, dust and heat. And an ever-growing crowd, silently moving through the street that cut through the town and led to the bridge. A bridge across the river Figis, to the road, to freedom. The people walking ahead were not ordinary travelers. They weren't on business visiting friends or family or searching for a new place. These people were fleeing. Women, men, children. They pushed loaded carts, carried bundles and baskets. They led animals. They carried what they had managed to pack in a hurry. Random, sometimes completely absurd things. A kettle, a bowl, a sack of durra, but also a broken umbrella, a painted parasol, some shoes, some rags. One man had no sleeping mat or bowl, but was carrying a basket full of scrolls on his back. I didn't realize then that this was precisely what war looked like. Somewhere out there, battles were being fought, blood was being shed, the sound of screams and the clash of steel filled the air. But that only happened occasionally. The army mostly marches from one place to another. Horses plod along, infantry trudges in the heat, dragging not only spears and shields but also kettles, cloaks, spare shoes and shovels, bowls and rugs. Behind them, trails are filled with stench and swarms of flies. And along the same roads, an ever-growing crowd of refugees march, with the remnants of their belongings in baskets and bowls. Thousands of sudden beggars walk forward. As far away as possible from priests, emperors, commanders and their madness. They no longer have homes, workshops, herds or fields. Just a kettle, a bowl, or a figurine from a table. They all shuffle along with their heads down. Even the babies don't cry. All you hear is coughing and the shuffling of thousands of souls. They parted before our cart, bowing their heads, setting down their baskets and bundles, and then kneeling with their foreheads pressed to the ground and their fists driven into the dust. It was as if our cart cut their legs out from under them, as if there were some plague around the cart that knocked everyone to the ground. But as soon as the cart moved on, the sickness passed, the people scrambled to their feet and resumed their hopeless march to nowhere. Our two-wheeled cart rolled through the crowd until we reached the square before the bridge. Once it must have been a large round market square where all the roads through the town converged. It was surrounded by inns and caravanserais, and you could probably buy goods from the farthest corners of the empire at the stalls. Once. Now, in the center, a banner flapped with the words, "Trade is greed. Only the mother feeds her children. Let all become one." And the stalls had vanished. Instead, refugees crowded at the square. The cries of children and the bellowing of animals filled the air. In the empire of Underground Mother, you couldn't even cross a bridge normally. Everywhere, there must be a mass of people waiting for who knows what. You couldn't fetch water from the well, nor you could cross the river. I didn't understand why. We slowly approached, cutting through the throng that parted before our onagas and fell to the ground like trampled grass, only to rise 3 steps behind us. A wagon blocked the bridge. It was a heavy cart, made of thick logs and boards, with its sides hung with black and green shields bearing the image of a coiled mountain viper, the emblem of a 13th Timon known as the Viper Timon. It blocked part of the road on the bridge. Another identical wagon was stationed farther along, pushed to the opposite railing. The crowd snaked between one wagon and the other, but only in sparse intervals. A few steps separated each person, while the rest waited in a disorganized mass before the line of soldiers. Down in the ravine, the thickest river raged, foaming and crashing against the rocks like an enraged serpent. As we approached the blockade, I felt a suffocating, roaring darkness engulf me. My poor heart leapt from my chest and lodged in my throat. It seemed like every beat sent a torrent of blood rushing through my veins, as wild and frothing as the river below. I was an adept of the underground mother, a mute idiot, a pimpleful from Kesaldem, taken in by the enlightened one, who saw in my dull mind a rare talent. After all, the mother often, in her generosity, takes away a sharp mind, sight, or speech only to give something else, for the glory of her underground womb, from which everything came and to which everything will return, becoming one. Perhaps I sing beautifully, paint or embroider. I, pimpled Agiren Kesaldem, Kashib, let all become one. I could already see the sweaty faces of the soldiers, framed by the scaled leather armor of the stone oxen. Black and green striped spears pointed at the sky. The commander's head wrapped in cloth of the same color, and the leather half-ammo with shoulder plates of a decanus. Between the wagons stood 3 horses of a pursuit group, though no one was mounted. The drivers had climbed onto the blocking wagon, where they had an excellent view and sat comfortably, yet they hadn't put down their short, glued cavalry bows, from which they were reputedly able to hit a bird in mid-flight while galloping. "I don't know much about priesthood," Hone had said earlier, "but I know the military, and there will be soldiers at the bridge, but we are not just part of a rabble. We will pass Redhead. Trust me." Some of the people approaching the blockade were led away by the soldiers to a square, where they were ordered to sit in a crowded, growing mass, their bundles piling up into a large heap by the bridge. That pile of miserable belongings frightened me more than the group of travelers forced to sit in a tight huddle with their hands on their backs. When someone's belongings are taken so unceremoniously, it doesn't bode well. A poor man carries everything he has left with him. If a bundle ends up on that chaotic pile, it sounds like an ominous, "You won't need this anymore." The commander sat on a folding chair behind a small table, which held a costly, resin-painted bottle and a palm wine drinking gourd framed in gold. He fanned himself with an infantry helmet and looked at the passing crowd with bored eyes. "We will pass. It's just the army. We belong to the enlightened. We listen only to the voice of a mother rising from the earth and the prophetess who came from the desert bearing truth. The iron scorpentine hangs from Hone's neck, a key to open every door on our path. We carry a box, across the bridge, far away, to Kebzegar, to the gates of Nahel Zin, to the edge of the world." Our cart squeezed through the crowd, and we approached the blockade. One of the donkeys stretched its snout and sniffled the bottle on the officer's table. I kept silent. I am a fool, pimpled Agiren. I barely speak, and when I do, it's babbling that only my master understands. I mumbled thoughtlessly, as if chewing on something, and stuck my finger in my nose. The travelers trying to cross the bridge knelt in circle around us, their heads bowed. The decanus looked up and met the gaze of the mirrored, expressionless mask of a priest, shining like a full moon. He rose from his chair and pressed his fist to his forehead. "Let all become one," he said. When Hone spoke from the driver's seat, his metallic voice, vibrating like the strings of a sitar, sounded alien and authoritative. At first, I didn't understand the word. I scratched under my tunic and continued diligently picking my nose. The unity speech was the old Amitraji language. It was comprehensible, but its grammar was strange, and for generations it had solely been the language of priests. "O cursed words that halt the mother's word in its journey to the hearts of the lost, for the travelling word haste is a blessed duty." That's roughly how it sounded. From what I understood of the guttural sounds of the old language, Hone was telling the decanus that he was a courier and that he was in a hurry. I understood it. The soldiers didn't. He caught only cursed warbirds and war, and took it personally, assuming Hone was reprimanding him. "Sir, we just I mean we have orders, a blockade on a bridge. Forgive me, enlightened one. Or perhaps enlightened lady. The temple's orders. Forgive me, I don't speak the old language. I'm just a soldier from Nasim." Hone leaned forward in the seat, pulled the iron scorpentine amulet from under his robe and held it out. His voice sounded like creaking of rusty gates. "Haste! Important! To open the blockade, Hon Pahan!" The commander, wiping sweat from his face, threw an order over his shoulder. The drivers jumped off the wagon and, bracing against the heavy sides, rolled it aside. Now, both wagons stood by the same railing, leaving a narrow passage through which our cart could pass. And that's when I saw the old woman. She was sitting on a stool behind the wagon, with two adepts attending her, one holding an umbrella, the other a straw fan. She wasn't wearing priestly robes of a mirrored mask, just indeterminate drab rags, though she was wrapped in them abundantly, as if shivering from the cold. Everyone who passed through blockade, whose bundles wasn't taken, and who was allowed to walk the winding path between the supply wagons, approached her. At that point, she would lift her face, with eyes clouded by a golden film, and touched their face with her aged hand. Her lips moved constantly, as if a woman was muttering curses or prayers. When I saw her, I felt my heart shatter suddenly, like a clay jack, a jack full of fear. And knower with blind eyes, the same kind as the assassin who killed my Irissa, the same as the leopards of the prophetess, golden albugo. What will she see when she touches my face? The knower rose from her stool and, supported by a soldier holding her by the elbow, hobbled to the left side of a bridge. The adepts took away her parasol and stool to make way for us. I pulled my finger out of my nose and raised the reins. The wheels of the cart creaked. The knower suddenly turned, her head raised, as if she were sniffing the air. Then she yanked her elbow free from the soldier's grip and raised her hand, fingers spread wide, walking straight towards us, wanting to touch my face. Hone turned face to the old woman, but his mask, like a pool of mercury, betrayed nothing. I froze. She was so close now that I could hear a toothless muttering trickling from her wrinkled mouth. The eye on the hand, the eye of mother. The mother feels, the mother knows. When her child lies, mother always knows. I saw the outstretched hand of the knower. Just 2 more steps and she would touch my face. Below, the river roared fiercely, thrashing between rocks that resembled jagged fangs. Too high, too shallow, too many rocks. Good. I tensed my muscles. Then came the low, drawn-out wail of a horn. It echoed from the tower looming the city like a rotting tooth. Movement began on the other side of the river. The soldiers guarding the far bank started the bustling about. The supply wagons, just like the ones on our side, shifted. One by one, they were rolled into place, accompanied by the shouts of a commander and the clanking of thick chains as they secured the vehicles. The bridge was closed. One of the soldiers suddenly appeared, as if from the ground, and blocked the path of our onagers, grabbing the reins of one and pulling it back. The cart halted. "Forgive me, O enlightened. The sun is setting. No one may cross the bridge after the horn has sounded." The decanus knelt before us, his fists pressed into the dirt, his forehead lowered. "The passage is urgent," Holmes' voice buzzed, like a wasp trapped inside the mask. "This is an outrageous impertinence. The pass must be opened immediately." The old woman still stood with her hand outstretched, but soldiers now separated us. She seemed to have forgotten why she was walking toward us, though her blind eyes remained fixed on me, cloudy and golden, like those of a moth. "This is bad time, O enlightened. The next settlement is far, and night will surprise you on the road. It is forbidden to spend the night on the road. There are traitors, criminals. These are the temple's orders, sir, or madame. This is what the mother commands. You must go to the tower, to the mother. They will shelter you for the night, and in the morning you can continue your journey," the commander recited. "Haste may all things lose their importance," Hone intoned. "Let the armed accompany the word if such is the commandment, but nothing must delay its march." I froze. Hone was clearly asking for an escort. I had no idea how we would handle the company of soldiers, but he must have thought it easier to deceive the soldiers than the other priests. I wasn't sure what scared me more, traveling with an army escort or spending the night in the Red Tower. "The temple makes the decision," the Hon Pahan said firmly, rising from his kneeling position. "I have my orders, let all become one." Apparently, we have gone overboard with our demand. We turned back from the bridge, heading into the packed crowd in the square, amid the pikes and helmets of soldiers, into the dead city. They did not show us the way. The Red Tower loomed above the stone houses of the Asherdam like a giant nest of steppe termites. It was impossible to get lost, and yet worse, it was impossible even to pretend to be lost. Two soldiers cleared the path for us through the sea of people crouching next to one another. They did it brutally, coldly, shoving them aside with blows from the butt of their spears and kicks, like herding a sheep. Just beyond the crowded square, the city was dead once again. All the doors and shutters were closed, not a living soul in sight. The sun was still high, but the shadows had already lengthened, covering the streets. There was still at least an hour until dusk, and yet they hadn't allowed us to continue. What had happened to the roadside inns and rest stops? How could trade function if everyone had to spend the night in town? And if a fateful hour caught someone far from any settlement, who would forbid them from continuing on or camping along the way? I couldn't break the habit of thinking that way. Whenever I encountered a new regulation, I immediately tried to imagine what it would look like in practice and what effects it would cause. Levebelt, my teacher, had been relentless in explaining that every child of certain age wants to fix the world with simple commands, even a ruler's child. But they must learn to understand that every command can have unintended consequences, or be followed incorrectly. And there are no edicts so powerful that the sun will suddenly extinguish, or that the river will stop flowing. That's why such orders should never be given. And that's why he had tirelessly made me consider what my ideas might bring about. Don't think the wind, don't command people to work on their hands, he used to say. It meant that some things are too vast and too complex to be controlled, any differently than by their natural course, and some edicts are so burdensome that people will try their best to avoid following them. And there's nothing you can do about it, because that's where the limits of power begin. But the priests of the underground mother didn't understand this. Everywhere I looked, I saw attempts to command the wind and force people to walk on their hands. I shouldn't be thinking like this. I was no longer the heir to the throne, much less the emperor. I was pimpled Agiren, a fool, an adept of a great priest sitting beside me on the cart. Anger surged through me, but I kept my eyes down on my sandals and the red dust of the street littered with refuse. As our cart rolled through the empty streets, where there was nothing but trash and crumbling stone and mud brick huts, Hone lifted his mask, revealing his sweaty and flushed face. The mask had two parts. One rested on his head, while the other, the part with the face, could be lifted and lowered like a lid. He pulled the hood of his cloak over his head and leaned toward me from the seat. "We have no choice," he whispered. "We are priests, and we must spend the night in the temple. Nowhere else in the city will take us in without arousing suspicion. Well managed. Just remember our fable, and don't say a word. Without these disguises, we might not make it across the bridge." "It would have better to stay in the bushes by the road, son of a wormwooder. Let's ditch these rags and wait it out in an alley like ordinary travelers," I muttered, barely audibly, careful not to raise my voice. But I knew Hone was right. Only parading as priest could have saved me from the touch of the old woman on the bridge, from the deadly brush of her fingers, and the gaze of her golden albugo-stained eyes. The hand, the eye of a mother. I shuddered. Hone wiped the sweat from his forehead and snapped the mask shut. His face disappeared again behind the metallic, featureless visage. The red tower stood on a large round square. It was hideous. I had seen many temples of all sorts. Some were designed to instill reverent fear in worshippers, others to inspire a solemn mood, and still others to provoke deep thoughts far removed from the concerns of daily life, like a starlit summer sky. The red tower looked somewhat like those strange stone formations found in caves and grottos. Wide at the base, it narrowed toward the top, crowned with bizarre, high battlements that resembled horns or fangs. It looked like something that had grown on its own, not something built by masons, carpenters, and architects. The square was a chaotic, crowded place. Nearly the entire space was filled with wagons loaded with durga, bleating sheep, and red buffalo. Soldiers and people in the robes of higher castes bustled among them. All the streets leading to the square were blocked by the army and clogged by a crowd that stood in silence, staring at the entire spectacle. The kashi bleated, the cattle let out desperate bellows, and it didn't take a villager to know that these animals hadn't had water for many hours. As we approached, the crowd slowly turned toward us and fell to their knees. Just like when we entered the city, we traveled down the streets surrounded by bowed heads and backs. The square was guarded by a wooden gate reinforced with sharpened stakes, propped from behind by beams. 2 infantry soldiers standing on the other side pulled the barricade aside when they saw us and led us inside. To the side, stood the rough structure of a garrison. Opposite it, the stone temple of a spreader, or at least I thought it was, because all the statues had been smashed, and the head of a benevolent giant lay at the base of its steps. The symbol of the underground womb has been painted on the doors. I walked beside the cart, feeling a strange exhaustion. All my fear had burned out on the bridge when I saw the old woman with her outstretched hand. Burned out, leaving my body charred inside. It seemed like I wouldn't be able to take another step, and in truth, I almost wished they would unmask and kill us already. I watched the fire roaring in front of the garrison wall, and the long procession of people walking the rows of soldiers, throwing scrolls into the flames. Letters, stories, treatises and poems. They fell into the roaring fire, then rose as black burning birds. The scrolls were of diverse content. Some praised, others cursed. They carried doubts, longings, dreams. In the House of Steel, we believed that scrolls were more valuable than gold, that they contained the thoughts and souls of those who had long since travelled the path uphill, and yet could still sing, teach, and amaze. That scrolls were alive. My grandfather had established special officials to whom every single scroll deemed as unnecessary, except for purely private notes, had to be handed over. They decided whether they could be destroyed or if they should be kept. Deliberately destroying scrolls was punishable by 5 years in the galleys. And now, all of that was being thrown into the fire. Why ignite the fire in the soul? Why make a person long for something unattainable or impossible? Why delight in certain thoughts and dismiss others with a shrug? Better for everything to become one. There's only one book, the Code of Earth. In it you will find everything that matters, and the rest shall be consumed by fire. There is only the present and what is before us, the commandments of the Mother and the future world, when she who gave birth to everything, and to whom everything will return, reclaims her inheritance. When there will be no day or night, no woman or man, no water or fire, only unity. Everything that diverts thoughts from that goal is doubt and must go into the flames. The people clutching bundles of scrolls wore tall hats made of reed paper on their heads. They walked between the rows, threw their loads into the flames, and then stepped aside, where they were gathered into a growing crowd. The hats looked both ridiculous and terrifying. I thought they must have been forcibly placed on these people's heads as a mark of shame. Smoke from the burning scrolls drifted over the square as we approached the temple, which resembled a large rounded oven. All the openings were round, including the red stone doorway we were driving through. The soft lines were meant to evoke the image of a maternal womb, but to me they resembled a gaping mouth. The 2 soldiers standing by the door stepped aside, and the gate opened by itself as if they had been waiting for us. The soldiers guarding the gate did not wear the black and green tunics of a viper timon, nor shields bearing the symbol of a coiled snake. Their uniforms were the color of blood, and their round shields, like those of the Kabiri, were marked with the symbols of the underground womb and small double moons at the top. The temple had begun to form its own army. I gripped the reins in my sweaty hand, feeling the blood pounding in my temples, and stared at my sandals as we entered. It felt as if the gate were swallowing us, as if the underground mother herself was swallowing us. I had been fleeing from her for so many days, and now I was entering her domain. As we passed through the gate, a cold wind struck, and from the sky clouded over, as it usually does in the late afternoon on the steep foothills of the east. But to me, it seemed as though the light has gone out the moment I crossed the threshold of a temple. Behind the gate, I saw another courtyard, and what I had mistaken for a domed building turned out to be just a wall, sloping like an inverted, bottomless bowl. In front of us rose another convex wall, and directly ahead was a stone-paved road leading through a series of round gates, one after another in the curved walls, with 2 corridors branching off to the sides, winding through the soft curves. The interior of a temple was a complex of spiral labyrinths. We stopped the cart, unsure of what to do next. The gates before us were the gates of mysteries. I remembered vaguely overhearing fragmented and conflicting pieces of knowledge that had reached us about the cult of the Ark-Mother. How I had wearily endured the droning, wasp-like voice of the teacher, my gaze wandering over the garden and the clouds drifting across the sky, while my thoughts lingered on the slender hands of Aina on my body. There was the outer temple. That's what they called everything that could be seen without being initiated. The limited teachings meant for ordinary men, the laws of the code, the rules of life, and the teachings of the pilgrims. And then there was the secret world meant only for the chosen enlightened and for the women. The inner temple. Some kind of sacrifices, initiation circles, and the gate of mysteries. All of it began here, where we had entered, but we knew very little about it. Those were the places accessible only to some men, an enlightened woman, and the enlightened, who were considered neither men nor women, but beings of unity, and places for the highest priestesses, called Archmatrons. Where we were allowed to go and how to get there, we had no idea. We had merely passed through the gate, and that's where our knowledge ended. The temple surrounded the tower with complex circles, and the tower itself stretched both upwards and downwards deep into the earth. We certainly couldn't just stand there on the first courtyard like a pair of fools. "Farewell!" Hone hissed through his mask, not moving from the driver's seat. I understood immediately. I grabbed the edge of the cart and, using all my strength, lifted it slightly, then kicked the hub of the same wheel we had already repaired once. I thought it bent slightly, almost imperceptibly. Hone nudged the onagers with his reed in a barely noticeable gesture, and the cart jolted forward, rolling its wheel directly onto a protruding stone in the cobblestones. There was a crack, and the warped hub shifted on the axle, causing the cart to tilt and stop. "You pimpled donkey!" Hone shouted through his mask, striking me with a reed. "You're as stupid as the son of the moon! Fix it now, idiot!" I had no choice but to fumble awkwardly around the cart, picking my nose and clumsily poking at the crooked wheel. Now we could wait idly for something to happen. The one who came out to meet us was tall, and that was all I could say about them. The robes of the priests were designed in such a way that the body shape disappeared beneath the folds. The round, stiffly embroidered shoulder cape, resembling a small circular cloak, made it impossible to tell whether the wearer had breasts. The face was hidden behind a mask. Even when the envoy spoke with Hone and led us through the gates of mysteries, eventually revealing the face, I still didn't know if we were dealing with a woman or a man. This person had a shaved head, lips painted crimson, eyelids adorned with gold and turquoise. Spirals were tattooed on the forehead and cheeks. Hone's face, by contrast, looked normal. Worse yet, it bore the marks of a battlefield, a long scar across his cheek and skin burned by the sun. His scalp was covered in scratches and scrapes from the hasty shaving. He had no tattoos. He looked nothing like the painted, pale figure leading us through the gates. That's why he hadn't removed his mask at all. I hoped they would just assume it was the arrogance of an important courier, too proud to deal with a provincial temple. "Straying from the cart is improper. The word travels with it. Any delay in the journey brings misfortune," Hone explained in the throaty jargon of a unity speech, even before we had set off, pulling out the scorpentine symbol from under his robes. "Where would the word be safer than in the mother's house?" the priest replied, folding their spiral painted hands and bowing their bald head. The voice was one that could have been either a man's high tone or the woman's low one. "The adepts will be commanded. The cart, animals, and cargo will be handled with utmost care." However, Hone removed the bundle from the compartment under the driver's seat and handed it to me. The box was oddly heavy for its size and frighteningly cold. Even through the cloak, it bit my skin as if it had spent the night in the frost. In the old language, there are no words for I, you, or even he or they. One does not say, "I am hungry," but rather, "At this time of day, hunger is felt," or, at most, "That who has not eaten feels hunger." It was easy to make mistake and difficult to say anything meaningful. Hone made sure that even his hands, with their broken nails and the grime of the road and weeks of wandering embedded in his skin, remained hidden within the sleeves. I also knew that we both surely stank. I no longer noticed it, but it couldn't be otherwise, given that we hadn't had a chance to wash since we had last been hosted by Plowshare, the son of a boat ride, and Amitraji who pretended to be Kirenis. But that had been several days ago. In the inner circles, the mask is not necessary among those who have met, remarked the painted being leading us coldly. The face of one is of no consequence. One does not exist. What matters is the word and its journey for the glory of the mother. Any unfortunate delay in the journey must be as brief as possible. Rest in safe place served the word well, the priest continued. It protects it from evil and will allow the one who leads it to redouble their efforts. Water, clothing, and a meal are the things needed when traveling through a fractured world, full of selfish evil and greed. And so we conversed, walking along the walls that curved like snakes. We turned several times through round passages into new corridors, and it became clear to me that I would not leave here without help. The narrow strip of sky above our heads was always the same, and the walls were adorned with identical reliefs. I didn't notice anything that could help me find my way on my own, but I could feel someone there. At times I heard footsteps behind me, and I would stop, but then the steps would fall silent. I'd look around and catch a quick, blurred motion out of a corner of my eye. A vague smudge of scarlet, but nothing more. Maybe it was just a reflection, or perhaps a flicker in my fear-tired eyes, or maybe I was only hearing echoes bouncing over curved stone walls. The temple walls occasionally enclosed small, round courtyards, and along the crooked walls, circular entrances to dark chambers, resembling shallow caves, were visible. Sometimes I thought I saw something move inside. Our guide pointed out to one of these, gave a curt bow, and left. The ceiling turned out to be curved, as if the room were the inside of a barrel lying on its side. In the center stood a new iron stove, and on the stone floor lay a thick, embroidered mattress. Aside from that, I saw a few mats, a low amitragi table made from buffalo horn, so low that one had to sit on the floor to use it, and a small stone statue of a lady of the harvest. A pregnant woman dancing, holding a sickle and a bowl, with the face of a monster, her head crowned with a headdress of crops. She stood in a shallow niche in the wall, lit by a small oil lamp. I set the box wrapped in the stiff, cold cloak on the ground and began massaging my frozen, stiff arms, sore from the effort. Hone slipped into the chamber through the low door and immediately fell to his knees before the statue. I opened my mouth, but I didn't get a word out. I heard Hone murmuring, his fists resting on the stone floor and his forehead touching the ground. "Mother, from whom everything comes and to whom everything returns. You who give birth, you who feed, you who divide, you who take away. Everything you give birth to, you devour, for it all belongs to you. Womb, eternal circle, flower, fruit and seed, beginning and end, the power of the mother." I froze with my mouth open. My expression was surely as vacant as that of Agegen Gesalden, the pimple-covered idiot. We were entirely alone here, in an empty room that resembled a clay kettle. There weren't even any corners where someone could hide. I knelt on the floor, watching my companion, my guide and protector. I watched as he touched his forehead to the floor 3 times, then crawled on his knees toward the statue and reached for a long, feather-like object lying in the niche. A small knife, made of black obsidian. I couldn't help but see him now as nothing but a figure cloaked in the red robes of a priest of the underground, hidden behind a long mask resembling the head of a silver hornet. I watched in silence, feeling the frost that had frozen my hands spreading in a numb wave across my entire body, as icy needles pricked my face and heart. Hone took the small knife in one hand and cut his thumb. He let 3 drops of blood fall into the bowl in the right hand of a lady of a harvest, and then smeared the blood over the teeth and the crotch of a figurine. He had protected me. He had killed for me. He had guided me through a land scorched by holy fire. Why would he betray me now? I knew this, and yet distrust flared up in my soul and smoldered still, like a spark in dry moss. Hone set the stone blade aside, straightened up, and only then removed his mask. I saw that as he fiddled with it, he briefly clenched his hand into a fist and touched his thumb to the lips. In the military language of gestures, this meant silence. Relief washed over me, but the fear did not fade. Hone pulled a cloth from his robes and wiped the sweat from his face. I sat down, leaning against the wall, and my eyes adjusted to the dimness of our chamber. I noticed a slender clay jug of water. Hone kicked me in the side before I could reach for the jug's neck. I crumpled against the wall, feeling as though my ribs had cracked, and the silver cup rolled across the floor. "Don't you dare touch it with your filthy hands, son of a moon!" Hone shouted. "How long will it take before I beat the wretched selfishness out of your kind? Don't ever reach first! Who drinks first, you miserable dog?" I looked at him, but his scarred, sunburned face expressed nothing but fury. He breathed heavily for a moment, then glanced quickly to the side and upward, just for a heartbeat, before his relentless, black eyes focused on me again. First the mother, then the archmatrons, then the enlightened beings, then me. I mumbled like an idiot, sniffing and kneeling with my fists pressed to the door. Then the daughters of the earth, you dog, he yelled, and only then does a dog like you drink last. Only a stick can clear your fogged moonstruck head. May all become one. And if you ever curse with me again, your tongue will be ripped out. He approached the jug, snatched the cup from the floor, and poured water into it. First, he sniffed the cup, then his wet finger and touched it to his lip. After a moment, he dipped the tip of his tongue into the water and waited a long time before taking a small sip. Finally, he gave a barely noticeable nod, drank the entire cup, and threw it at my feet. Then, we sat in silence until the clay dome of the cell. Hone wiped the inside of his mask with a rag, then placed it on his head, raising only the part meant to cover his face. He crossed his legs, rested his hands on his knees, and closed his eyes. I sat across from him, almost laying on my side, glancing out through the round entrance to the paved courtyard. Beneath the slanting walls, dark circular openings to cells like ours loomed, but I couldn't make out anything in them. Sometimes I thought I saw some movement in the darkness, but that could have been just the trick of a light. There was utter silence and stillness. Only a few small greenish birds hopped across the stones of the courtyard. The temple was old and perhaps abandoned until very recently. Layers of lime were peeling from the stone walls, patches of mold marked the faded frescoes, and in some of the corridors old junk and debris were strewn about. How had the once declining cult of the Archmother suddenly risen again? How had we managed to overlook it? We had the Knowers, the most powerful army in the world, spies and strategists. It only took one mad prophetess, 6 months of drought, and one night in which everything collapsed. The rich, vibrant empire turned into a battlefield. Of the entire Tiger Empire, only Hone and I remained, and maybe a handful of survivors wandering through the forests. Along with noble madmen like Plowshare, son of a boatwright. I caught myself reminiscing, wasting my life energy on pointless, painful reflections that would only tire and weaken me, without changing anything for the better. I had a roof over my head, only my legs and ribs hurt where Hone had kicked me. My thirst was quenched, and because of a constant fear, I didn't feel hunger. For now, I had not been unmasked. I was a fugitive, nothing more. And I should only care about the fugitive's concerns. The dilemmas of emperors should be left to emperors. I was bone weary, so I should sleep, gather strength. I will need it tomorrow. I slept lightly and restlessly, so I leapt to my feet the moment I heard footsteps approaching. 2 people were coming. One in wooden clogs, the other in soft felt boots with leather woven soles. When I opened my eyes, Hone already had his mask on, still sitting motionless as before. The old man, shaved bald and wearing wooden clogs, knelt before our chamber and bowed his head. He wore a dull, sack-like robe and tattered trousers that reached his knees. Someone stood beside him, but all I could see were small feet in sandals, so perhaps a woman or a child, and the edge of a red robe. I have brought food and water and light and one, wisdom of a mother. He set a wooden tray, shaped like a box, on the ground, crawled into the cell, and laid out painted boxes and bowls on the low table. I looked at the table. A bowl of cooked vegetables, baked katmul dumplings, a few flatbreads, cubes of bean cheese, and wooden tongs for eating. Hone picked up the steaming bowl of vegetable stew and brought it to the silver nostrils of his mask. "The bodies of the children of the earth are not to be eaten!" His voice rang out with disgust. "Only the Ark-Mother may devour them. This dish reeks of the fish flesh and sinful spices, spices that weaken the body and spirit and are a sin to health. This food is unclean and must be taken away. Bread, cheese, and water are enough to sustain the body, while the spirit belongs to the mother." He set the bowl aside, nervously pulling out a cloth and wiping his fingers, which had been touched by the steam. The second figure in the robe, the one whose feet I had seen, suddenly kicked the kneeling servant in the side. I heard a dull thud and a muffled groan. "Mon-brained goat! You mixed up the bowls, you stinking brute! You have disgraced our temple!" The newcomer fell to his knees with fists pressed into the stone courtyard beside the groaning old man, and bowed their smoothly shaven head, which was small and delicate. One shoulder was bare, and on the forehead was painted a red symbol, a split line ending in twin spirals. The figure raised their face. I saw the eyes, the shape of the mouth, and the eyebrows, and I thought it was probably a girl, an initiate. There was something disturbingly familiar in her features, though I couldn't place what that was. "Unforgivable! A disgrace has occurred!" she cried. "Warriors may sometimes receive the living flesh in the meals, as the prophetess allows. This pig mixed up the bowls and shamefully brought unclean dishes meant for the mon-brained dogs. He will be punished severely. May all become one." "Bread, cheese, and water," Hone repeated. "The rest should be taken away." We were left alone, still without saying a word. I remember the lesson Hone had taught me when I tried to drink water, so I didn't move an inch. Hone offered a short prayer of thanks, then repeated the same ritual he had performed with the water. He touched his lips with a piece of bread, waited for a long time, chewed a small bite, and spat it into his hand. After waiting again, he tore off a piece and decided to eat it. I figured he was testing whether the food was poisoned. Maybe it was prudent, but I thought he was overdoing it, just like sending away the stewed vegetables and dumplings. Since we were already being served, I would have gladly eaten something other than just bread and water. I watched as he ate slowly, then placed the leftovers on the tray and pushed it across the floor toward me. I ate the dry bread, the sour bean cheese with its sharp, unpleasant smell, and drank a cup of water. I still didn't feel hunger and hoped nothing else would happen, that they would let us sit until morning and send us on our way. But I didn't wait long before I heard the sound of footsteps on the stones again, and someone approached. It was the same priest who had led us through the gate. It seemed they couldn't find anything else to do here. The painted-faced figure knelt in the low entrance, filling it completely. "Soon the mother will swallow the son," the figure announced. "The horns will sound the curse of darkness. The time of the evening offering is approaching. It is customary for the ritual to be led by a priestly figure to whom hospitality has been humbly offered. It would be an honor for the tower." I froze. Home might know a few random prayers, but how could possibly he know how to lead the rites? I realized we had no chance now. By coming so close to the seat of the underground mother, we had drawn her attention. We couldn't succeed, not right under her nose. A traveler spirit is not pure enough to descend into the sacred sanctuary, Holmes said in a stern, grumbling voice. One who can recognize sin even in a ball is pure enough to meet the deity, the priest replied coldly, and this time I was sure it was a man. When the mother's call is heard, one cannot allow a delay. Hone rose slowly, as if carrying a basket full of stones on his back. Again, don't go anywhere, he said in normal speech. Guard the word. I understood that I had to escape, but how? Through the labyrinth at the foot of the tower, through the closed gate? And how would I cross the bridge afterward? Only with the robe of an initiate? Our baskets of clothes and food, our spy staffs, everything was on the cart. Could I leave home to the mercy of a temple? The place of an adept is beside his master, the priest declared. Should another be appointed? How else would the sacrifice be made? It was over. We would have to enter the labyrinth of slanted walls again, and follow the winding corridors into the unknown. This time, however, we took a different route, as we quickly found ourselves in the outer courtyard encircling the tower and the labyrinths. And suddenly, there was a crowd. Women in caste-colored, flowing robes gathered in the noisy throng. Some were waiting for something, others clearly demanding something. Some sat against the walls, hunched over, occasionally resting their heads on their arms. Some looked excited, others defeated. I had thought the interior was deserted and almost empty. I had grown accustomed to the winding, empty corridors inhabited by only shadows and echoes. It seemed the commotion had been left outside in the square, beyond the tower gates. As we passed through the crowd, no one knelt before us. The women reached out their hands, either stroking our robes or clutching at them tightly. They wanted something from us, but in all the clamor it was impossible to hear what. His name is Altai Kirdagai. We must reach the mountains to our family. We are from a Hardim. Give me back my husband. He did nothing wrong. Altai Kirdagai. Let us in to see the Archmatron. We want to speak with the mother. Give me back my son. Tugulai Merek. He's a good boy. Let me talk to him at least. He's sick. He can't carry stones. Mother, a blessing for the sick. Let us to the Archmatron. The figure leading us walked us through the crowd in silence, unstoppable, pushing aside the outstretched hands as we followed behind. The woman remained behind as we passed through the round gate, entering another narrow courtyard that surrounded the tower in a ring. I thought that we should kill this priest and flee. The sooner the better. The farther and deeper we went, the harder it would be to escape. But Hone walked calmly alongside him. I didn't know what he planned, but I had to trust him. In the second courtyard, we encountered more people. They sat against the slanted walls on the stone pavement surrounding a broken, dried-up fountain. All were dressed in the turquoise and crimson robes of the Ephraim and Agazim, with hoods on their heads. Despite their fine, costly attire, they looked weary and worn, as if they had been sitting there for hours. When they saw us, they rose from the fountain's edge and the stone benches beneath the wall, then fell to their knees, resting their feet on the cobblestones. Our guide marched forward briskly, clearly not intending to stop. We were merely cutting through this courtyard. However, the kneeling figures did not move. They didn't rise from their knees, forming a barricade of bent, silk-covered backs in gleaming turquoise or crimson. The priest called it, huffing through his mask with anger. "An impertinence occurs!" He snarled. "Clear the way!" One of the men rose slowly. He was large and broad-shouldered, with a white and mitrage face, now flushed and sweaty, and his eyes gleamed an impenetrable blue. His cheeks were marked by diagonal stripes of Ephraim tattoos. "I am Farley al-Sabaji, from the house of Chinegai of the Ephraim tribe. We have been waiting here humbly for 2 days without water or food, as commanded by our holy woman. The house of Chinegai has protected the temple fields of a great mother for 10 times 10 generations, from the river to scorched hills. The mother of the house of Meraduka, Ankh-Urgatala, of the Tagalai clan, have tended the herds of the Yarh-mother, 5 times 1,000 kashib. We have seals, we have iron marks. The cursed foreign dynasty has fallen, and the fruits of the mother are returning to her domain, until all becomes one. We have waited 2 days, but the noble Arch-Matron has no time for us. The animals are dying in the squares. The soldiers of the war do not know how to care for them. The kashib are breaking the legs in the crowd. The animals are dying of thirst. The dura lies in heaps, attracting rats and vermin. We beg you, enlightened one, to convey our humble pleas to the Arch-Matron. Let her send a word of truth. Allow us to take the temple's goods to our pastures and storehouses before everything is ruined." "Silence, fool!" the priest shouted. "Soon the Arch-Mother will swallow the sun. The underground womb is hungry. If the path is not cleared immediately, your blood will feed the goddess, and so it will be, for all is to become one, should a single word of doubt be spoken." "We are obedient," the Ephraim whispered, bowing his head and stepping aside. We moved on, emerging into the main corridor, where the subsequent gates of mysteries opened and closed, sliding apart in spindle-shaped portals. We went farther and farther, and with every clang of closing wrought iron door behind us, I felt the shimmer of hope slipping away. The farther we went, the darker it grew. Smoke drifted through the corridor, and I breathed in the scent of fragrant herbs and oils, undercut by terrifying stench of decay. Beyond the third gate, there were no slanted walls or darkening sky overhead, only a tunnel. Lit by flickering lamps, their glow danced over the stone bodies of female demons, writhing in ecstatic dance. It shimmered under grotesquely bulging eyes, adorned with white, pearlescent shells on the blood-red, hook-like teeth, swollen breasts and birth eyes. It looked as if the fiery snakes were slithering across them. Another gate closed behind us, and I heard a low, ominous hum, as if thousands of sea creatures were moaning in the darkness. The sound reverberated, making my stomach tremble. The stench became even more distinct. The last gate slid open, iron, with teeth interlocking like a vertical maw. The sound came from all around, pressing down on me, making the hairs of my neck stand up. I felt my hands grow damp and my legs filled with liquid lead. Life has no meaning. It is only a blink of an eye, I thought. I came from nowhere and I go into the unknown. There is only the path uphill, where the Creator awaits me. The path uphill is hard, for the path is stony. There is only a tear and a stone. Where everyone goes I shall go too, for they are awaiting me. I go to reach. The road is not important. The road is a blink of an eye. I recited a prayer for the dead, like a soldier before battle. From that moment on, I was to consider myself already dead, but it helped little. Levabelt has taught me to focus on my breathing. to ensure the air flowed through my body. Fear, he said, arises from thought. What matters is what you see, not what you might see. What happens, not what might happen. Focus on breathing and extinguish the thoughts where terror takes root. There are only the heart, muscles, and lungs. The interior of the tower was vast, dark and round, like an overturned bowl topped with a spire. It stretched toward the sky, and we stood as if inside a giant furnace. I looked up and saw a small circle of a greyish sky above, and I quickly extinguished the thought that I might be seeing it for a last time. The chamber resembled a gloomy cave, illuminated only by a single beam of light that shone through a circular window in the tower's wall, cutting through it like a lens and landing on a vague statue of black stone at the bottom. The round gallery we stood on was the largest, but I could see others above and below us. The mournful lamentation echoed up and down, filling the space like a dense liquid. I felt as if both my eyes and ears might start bleeding at any moment. It was like the roar of an elephant or the buzzing of giant bees in a hollow tree. I had encountered things in life that one must experience to understand, but cannot describe with words. I knew I would never forget this sound. A damp, cellar-like chill and a faintly decaying odor wafted up from the dark floor of a cavern. The stench was also unmistakable, though not yet overpowering. The beam of light grew redder. The window had clearly been designed to capture the light of a setting sun and direct it straight onto the statue. It appeared to be the silhouette of a seated woman, but I couldn't see it clearly. The glow, painted only crimson, flashes on its surface. We couldn't escape the way we came because of the gates of mysteries had closed behind us. We would have to wander blindly through the dark, twisting corridors, charging ahead, knocking down anyone who stood in our way. Any moment now, some ritual would begin. A ritual in which we were to participate without knowing what to do. Worse yet, it might involve actions no man should perform. Would we have to feed blood to the statue? What lengths would I go in order to survive and fulfill my father's final command? The beam of light turned red and then extinguished, plunging us into sudden silence and darkness. Then, rings of lamps ignited on the galleries. I saw figures in loose hooded robes swarming in the shadows, barely visible in the darkness. I saw them on the galleries and down below, on the cavern floor. The infernal buzzing resumed, but it was softer and even deeper now. It seemed both mournful and ominous, a dark, trembling song without words, filling me with sorrow and despair. It was as if it poisoned the very soul. On the floor of the cavern, oil blazed in 3 enormous basins, each large enough to roast an entire ram. The statue was immense, and only now did I see it clearly. I had never seen an image of the underground mother before. I had only encountered statues of the incarnation of the Lady of the Harvest. Perhaps it was her daughter, but the underground mother herself did not appear monstrous. A colossal, squatting woman with a gentle, smiling face, her hair made of flowers, branches, and fruits. Between her legs, the subterranean darkness slumbered. In her outstretched hands, she held a jug and duracops, as if offering them to her children. The one from whom all things come, and to whom all things return. The Lady of Abundance, the Feeder and Mother. The trumpets, if they were trumpets, fell silent. Absolute silence fell. And then I saw the lights. 2 rows of flickering flames in the hands of hooded figures who emerged onto the cavern floor from hidden doors and formed a semicircle around the statue. I heard a song. A gentle, tender song about the comfort of mother's arms. About the just heart of a caretaker who looks after her children. A song sung in high voices, so beautiful that I felt my eyes sting. The soft voices of girls or children tightened my throat. I felt tired, lonely and haunted. I longed for the comfort and peace the song promised. I yearned for a world where there was no need to fight, where no one had to seize anything from one another, but everything was given from the just hands of a mother. Warm and gentle, like in my childhood, which I had spent in the house of Cinnabar, where war, blood and dust did not exist. The priest leading us shook home by the shoulder. "Time," he said. I hesitated. I didn't want to stop listening to the song. The circle of singers bent in unison, placing the lamps at their feet, then stepped back, unfastening their cloaks, which slipped gently to the ground. I saw delicate silhouette, breasts and hairless loins. I saw the delicate spirals and circles painted on the bodies and leaned over the stone balustrade. It lasted only a moment. "Time!" The priest backed again, yanking my sleeve. He led us down a spiraling stone staircase, with lights flickering in the niches. I was no longer afraid. I thought we were descending to the floor of a cavern, where the girl stood and from where the sweet song still emanated. I was almost half-conscious, and I don't know why I thought we would somehow manage. The room we entered was separated from the cavern by a row of columns carved with intricate floral designs. The girls let out a melodic cry, raising their arms, then spun around. I froze. It seemed like my eyes were deceiving me, but amid the flickering light, fragrant smoke and patches of shadow, I saw some of the dancers had a small, hairless and strange masculinity, yet above it breasts too, bouncing in a rhythm with their steps. "Hurry!" the priest barked. The columns and walls were covered with patterns, flowers, branches and fruits intertwined in delicate formations, except they hadn't been conjured by a stonemason's chisel. They were bones. Skulls, ribs, jaws, vertebrae, and shin bones arranged in such a way that they were hard to recognize. At first, you saw intricate leaves, chalices, stems, and fruits, until you recognized the first skull. Then you began to see them, everywhere. The song still flowed, soothing and beautiful. Hone and the priest stood over a stone table, where a row of curved basalt knives lay, smooth and gleaming like the talons of some enormous creature, with handles carved from the bone. "Quick mercy will be needed," the priest muttered, as if remembering something. "It will be needed, otherwise we won't finish before nightfall." He placed a mace on the table, a weapon resembling a hammer on a long handle, but with a spike instead of a head. The spike was carved from the same basalt as the knives, sharp, hard, and gleaming like black glass. The grinding of chains and iron reached my ears despite the lingering song in the air. The iron gate, made of thick bars, rose, revealing an opening in the wall beside our alcove. I saw them. Naked men, packed tightly together, their heads shaved hastily and brutally, just like mine and Hone's. They stood in a long row, pressed against each other, moving only forward, the next man close to the back of the one in the front, with only a narrow passage between two stone walls leading to the center of the cavern. I saw them trembling. Someone muttered monotonously, someone else sobbed, and another panted loudly and spasmodically. All the men, except for 1 and 2 women among them, herded like cattle, with wide staring eyes, old, young, some even younger than me. I heard the quiet voice of a child, softly wailing, "Oh, not yet, just a little longer, please, please, just a little longer." And I turned to eyes. I looked at home, but all I saw was my own reflection in his mirrored mask. He simply stood motionless, not moving an inch. I looked at his hand, which had slipped from his sleeve. I wanted to make sure it was still dirty and sinewy, or whether it was soft and painted with spirals. They were of similar height. Would I be able to tell them apart? I looked at the iron, spiraled rod with a basalt fang at the end. Would I be fast enough to grab it? A quick mercy. In a moment it will be granted to you. Home still stood motionless. Was he planning to go through with this, hoping he would figure out what to do? And then slaughter these wretches just to get his child out of this mess? I didn't want to die, but I also did not want to live at such a price. Forgive me, Father, I have failed. I know you will understand. "Time!" barked the priest in his metallic voice. "Waiting is improper. It is time to undress. The oppressors will be brought in soon. It is time for the mother's wrath. It is time to balance the wrongs of this world." Yes, the time for the wrath. The time. I took a deep breath and, just as my master of war had taught me, I ignited an inner fire at the center of my body. I threw in all my exhaustion, fear, anger, and pain as if I was feeding a furnace. Then I let that fire fill my veins. "There are more important matters," a voice suddenly rang out, a powerful, female voice. I looked toward the door and saw a figure clad in a hooded cloak. "This is a routine offering. Let those who are meant to handle it do so. Those who travel carrying the word should speak." The priest slowly knelt, placing his fists on the floor. "O great Archmatron, Hafram Akedel, truth has been spoken," he said. Home also bowed low. I knelt as if breaking steel that had solidified in my joints, placing my fists on the stone floor and touching my forehead to the ground. The fire in my veins still roared. It burned in my head, flashing images before me. Quick, blazing like a lightning strike, a leap, a bone-handed prick in hand, a swift strike of iron straight to the shaved, painted skull, a leap onto the table, a knife in the other hand, then a dash for the stairs, a blow of iron to the knees, and then the knife to the throat, at the life's vein that pulses at the side of a neck. The obsidian claw, sharp as a shard of glass and as hard as a diamond. Then, who would stop us if we led the Archmatron with a blade to her throat? The lightning flashed and was gone, and I did none of the things it had suggested. When we walked the stone steps by lantern light, then through the winding corridors wrapping around the tower, the sweet song of solace was still reaching me. I stopped hearing it only where the first terrifying scream pierced the air, muffled, echoing somewhere behind the walls inside the belly of the tower. We emerged outside into the first dusk. Against the grey sky, the tower jabbed at the clouds with jagged, horn-like battlements, and around its peak, crows circled, like scraps of soot from the burning scrolls.